Frank LaRose. It started in the Senate, moved to the House, has had 4 hearings. We'll have its 5th hearing and possible vote on Tuesday. Any of you can come on down, please do come on down. House Bill 250, Representative John Becker has introduced that. That will limit early voting even more. So we'd like to see early voting limited to just 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. Now, most in this room would like it to be the constitutional 1 day, right? Probably not going to get that, but we can reduce this thing and rein it in. Get ready at Golden Week is key because the left has had these concerts and they bring people in from out of state and they literally register them there at the table and give them an absentee ballot. They vote on the same day. Now the boards of election came in and testified and said this is a problem. We can't vet these people. We don't know. So those votes are probably counted in 2008 and 2012, and they brought in Bruce Springsteen and some of these other leftists, right? These big rallies. So we're not paying attention, folks. They're bringing in these hordes of people, they're registering them, they're voting them, they're stuffing that ballot box here in Ohio, in the battleground state of Ohio. That's what's happening. Then let's talk about court-ordered voting. That's where a federal judge meddled with Ohio's election laws over the objections of the Secretary of State and boards of election directors, both Democrat and Republican, by the way, who said we've already hired as many workers as we possibly can to throw at us 3 days just before the Tuesday presidential election. We can't handle that. There's no time to rectify the poll books. Remember the voting on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before the Tuesday election? Anybody vote in those 3 days here? Anybody here? Anybody go down to the boards and see what was going on? My daughter, I dropped her off because she was a college student and she was to vote early, so I dropped her off. She waited in line 4 hours at the Summit County Board of Elections. That's how many people that were lined up to vote that day.
What happens if they ignore the federal order? It's only 3 days. Ignore it.
In the future, we probably should. We made a report and we said, look, the federal judge got it wrong. He said this isn't going to be a problem. It led to chaos all across the state of Ohio, and this is why. Had testimony out of Cuyahoga County. Lady went in, she works the polls there. She votes that morning, like most of you that work the polls, you'll vote. And then she was discovered as the board gave her a list. They gave her a long list. They said, now these people voted early. Mark an A next to each of their names. You want to talk about the possibility of human error right at the end when we're opening up the doors for a presidential election. So that in and of itself is a problem because there was no time to rectify the poll books because you voted Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before the Tuesday election. There's no way to do that. So they gave this long list of names, said mark an A next to each of these names. They voted early. She discovered that she was on the list. Her daughter was on the list. Her neighbor was on the list, none of which voted early. Then all these people came in the next 2 hours and said, I didn't vote early, and she had to give them a provisional ballot. Now, this happened all around the state of Ohio. It also led to other problems. Let's talk about Van Wert County, for instance. Out in Van Wert County, there's a report. There was a lady went in. She was told, elderly lady, that she already voted. No one offered her the provisional ballot. You want to talk about the disenfranchised voter? Because of this loony federal judge who threw this at us, the poll worker just said, oh, it's listed here, you already voted. She walked out without not being able to cast her vote. Now, I don't think that's what the veterans had intended when they fought for this country. Is it?
No.
Okay. So you got to get a little mad about this. You know how the left is always railing? Folks, you got to get mad about this, okay? You got to just get downright nasty about it, that you want these laws changed back to where it's going to be done right here in Ohio. Now, here's Houston there when he's doing his thing. He wants proof of voter fraud. Well, we presented quite a bit to the Secretary in sworn statements all over the state of Ohio. Now let's talk about voting machines for a minute. Here you have touchscreen monitors here in Medina County, right? Anyone ever have a problem with a touchscreen monitor casting your ballot? You have? What was your problem?
It wouldn't register how I voted.
Okay, so the calibration was off, right? We saw this in Marion County on election day. It was a big news story on Fox News that people were pressing one candidate and another candidate kept coming up, right? This happened all over the state of Ohio with touchscreen monitors. Why? It's not a conspiracy. These machines are, reaching the end of their shelf life. They're out of calibration. They're not working well. It's like your cell phone. The smartphone, after a while, it doesn't work very well if you ever had your screen go dead on you, right? It's the same thing with these voting machines. So in Franklin County, they had a terrible problem. And so what we did was, in the citizens audit, is collect poll workers' notes and incident reports from election day, November 6, 2012. So we didn't really, we just took sworn statement of early voting. But these are reports that are generated by people like you, right? You write down any kind of irregularity or report, and that's what we compiled. Problems with provisional ballots, problems with voting machines, problems with suspicious activity or voter fraud, and we got plenty of it. We detailed all that, categorized it, and submitted that back to the Ohio Secretary of State, Bill Batchelder, the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and the Attorney General, and members of the media. We did our press conference in November, and then we began working on suggestions for change. And if you'll turn over the sheet that you have here, this one, well, we're going to get to that. We gave a list of suggestions. Better training of poll workers. I'm going to run through this quickly, Jim. Provisional ballots should be printed a different color. This was a great idea from a volunteer. I'm going to explain why that's going to help in a big way. Replacing faulty voting machines. I mean, here's this poor lady down in Guernsey County. She's not on the internet. She heard us on the radio. She called into the office and she said, hey, I have a story to report. I went in to vote and every candidate I pressed, the opposite candidate came up. She couldn't fix it. She went out to tell the poll worker, then she waved her hand and said, oh, we've been having trouble with that machine all day. Okay, you're supposed to pull the machine, right? This is the kind of thing was happening. So these touchscreen monitors, they, where they're having a lot of problems, they have to go. In Franklin County, I mean, they had problems all over. They had to shut down whole precincts for an hour or two until another machine came. That's not right. The last thing people want is a problem with the voting apparatus when you go in to cast your ballot, right? I mean, you want to make sure your vote counts. And anything that's obstructing that needs to be dealt away with. Now, the optical scan has had a better success rate. That's where you're making your mark, you scan it into the machine, and there's a paper ballot trail and all that. Now, those are having a better success. In fact, Colgate County, I guess to their credit, they did pull out the touchscreen monitors because they were having a lot of problems with them, and they replaced them with the optical scan. Why do we have half the counties have optical scan, half the counties have touchscreen monitor? Because not one vendor would get the whole thing and it would show a balance. Okay, that's why it was done. But here's the problem with optical scan, not the machine, but the process with a provisional ballot. At the desk, when someone can't be found in the poll book, they're given a provisional ballot. The Help America Vote Act says that they must receive a ballot, isn't that right?
Right.
So they go over to the booth, they make their mark, and they're to bring it back to the table. In fact, it's supposed to be put in a yellow envelope indicating that it is a provisional ballot. Here's the problem. If that worker gives them a secrecy sleeve like anybody else, it looks like any other ballot. And what we've got as testimony is those provisional ballots are making right in the machine. They're walking over and feeding it in. We have testimony about that. This last election, I worked the inner city of Akron, the Safford Steen Towers, a 90% African-American community precinct. And leading by example, I thought I'd work the polls and witness this stuff myself. And there were, in fact, while I was at the ballot judge, Edna was over there at the table, and I'm waving this gentleman over because there's two different precincts, making sure he registers it in the right machine. And she says, oh, that's a provisional ballot. I said, Edna, how was I to know? You didn't put it in the yellow envelope, you put it in a secrecy sleeve. That's how these things happen, human error. So I got him back over to the table. So even while I'm watching the machine, well, what would rectify that? Make the provisional ballot a different color. Now you're talking about half the counties where those things are going to be flagged if they try to get, if they're pink or green, right? You say, oh no, that's provisional ballot, go back to the table. Then it goes back to the board, they vet if that person's actually duly registered and able to vote, and that's a better way to clean up that process. Early voting, we got to get rid of early voting before the weekend before the election, that's just out. Photo ID requirement, it polls at 70%. I sat with a good speaker last week, we had an hour-long meeting, and we brought up the photo ID requirement bill. State Representative John Becker has introduced the bill, House Bill 269, and it has not yet had a hearing. And I told the speaker, I said, well, I heard a rumor that you might want to put this one on the ballot. I said, we'd be okay with that. Everybody okay with that if they put it on the ballot for a vote?
Yeah.
So that indeed might be what happens here. Yeah, well, that, and the Secretary of State's not in favor of photo ID.
Well,
kind of a political
How about
reason.
nothing to sign it?
Well, yeah, all of that. And so, and then when the Democrats are, you know, we'll save them the opportunity to referendum it. I said, give me a clean bill though, right? It's gotta be clean. I want it to be photo ID with a provision that allows for for people at or below the poverty level to get a free photo ID at the BMV, like they did in Carolina.
Is
So,
it the same one that they passed in Indiana, or is it different?
that's what we want to do right now. In fact, Larry Oboff could probably help with that. As you know, and when he spoke, and I don't know how much he spent on election laws, a lot of these things started in the Senate and then working their way in the House. The House will get its say though, and so the Senate, yeah, liberal. It's a little more modern, shall we say, over there in the Senate. So by the time it gets to the House, then the amendments will be put in, then the final thing will be done. So I'm not so in disagreement with that process. So
So the challenge by the Supreme Court is if it's not the same bill as Indiana.
Indiana, right? That was upheld. That we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that it reflects Indiana. And I asked Larry to look at the Pennsylvania one that they just threw out. Did anybody see that?
Yeah.
They had a photo ID in Pennsylvania. We don't. He said, I have not yet looked at that. And he said, I'll take a look at what their problem was. So yes, it does have to pass legal muster. Although the Justice Department, and that's a conflict of terms, isn't it? Eric Holder, no one in this room has any confidence in that man and what he might do. But it can't prevent us from doing what we have to do as citizens of Ohio, fix our election laws, right? And we the people then, so if they put it on the ballot, we pass it, make it look like Indiana that has already faced the scrutiny of the court, we have a better chance of allowing it to stay on the books. I like the tactic though of the legislature, and that is kind of a shotgun approach. They did a lot of election legislation. One bill cleans up the voter rolls, okay? And that needs to happen. And so they've given the Secretary of State and local boards of election what they need to clean up the voter rolls. We're talking about the deceased, all right? And getting these people purged from the list. Look, in this room, you're not thinking of voter fraud, but those who do, this is the nooks and crannies in which they try to find a way to get in. You know, one thing we saw in the reports, and again, these are the testimony of the people that work the polls, something called a fleeing voter. And I said, is that a talking point? No, this is what people put down. And I said, when they did the training, did they tell you fleeing voter? They said, no. And that means someone's gone in, they're in the process, next thing you know, they're gone. They disappear. Well, what's happening with that? Well, that's suspicion, isn't it? Suspicion of activity. Maybe they got a little nervous when they're trying to commit voter fraud at the poll. Maybe they were in the process of doing it, like this one lady who had a Florida driver's license, no other identity of an Ohio residence, was told by the judge, you can't vote here, you have no, you're not an Ohio resident. She came back a few minutes later, skipped him, went to the other precinct judge, a Democrat, was awarded a provisional ballot. Next thing you know, there is an argument between that poll worker and the ballot judge because the lady's gone, there's an empty yellow envelope. What happened to the ballot? You know what happened. It went into the machine and she was gone. Okay, this is sworn statement by Mike Griffith up there in Cleveland. So we provided, it's interesting to watch the media's reaction when we provided all this information to them, facts basically. Not hearsay, not rumor, facts, sworn statements. They didn't challenge any of that. They knew that this happens, okay? You had the report in Hamilton County really helped out with Meloise Richardson, okay? So when the Democrats try to say this is just an effort to suppress the vote, no. It's an effort to fix voter fraud and the cheaters in Ohio. Secretary of State's on board with that. Photo ID requirement, polls at 70%. We should have no problem getting this through, but we got to press now. This is crunch time now. Senate Bill 238, getting rid of Golden Week, has to pass. House Bill 250 will be in its sponsor hearing on the same day. They may take a provision that takes, limiting it from 1 week, from 35 to 28 days, limiting it down to 2 weeks, okay, with Becker's bill. Then the photo ID requirement bill. And then the provisional ballot bill that Senator Seitz has currently is requiring more information of these individuals to put on the sleeve of the provisional ballot, and we're asking for an amendment to make it a different color. So that would help in at least half the counties so these things don't make their way into the machine. And one election official told me, Chris, even if they did, we can discount those because they're a different color. They shouldn't have been in there. It's very easy to see. You just take out the green or pink ones and you take them, subtract them from the vote. So this is a way to really clean up Ohio's election laws. This is what we've been about the last year. It's been an unfunded effort, all volunteer. We appreciate your help. You want to stop by the table, you want to make a donation, because we've got to press between now and May. Because after this section of the legislature, it's over. Then it's election time. Then we're going to be heading into a presidential election. Folks, we need to do this now. We need to get it done now. Because if we can't wait till next year. There is no next year. Because there's going to be so much pressure on these men and ladies down there at the legislature, and they're not going to have the will to get this done. We've got to fix it now. And so I'd love for them to put photo ID requirement on the ballot so our election laws will look a lot better. Cleaning up the voter rolls. We put the fear in them about voter fraud with some of these high-profile cases of people going to prison. And then, of course, well, there's a lot more. I'm taking too much time already. Maybe next time we could talk about the college vote, all right? Yeah. Go to our website at ohioca.org, and you'll see a lot more information. You'll see some of the video from the press conference, you'll see the press reports, and you'll see the sworn statements as well, and the Secretary of State's report as well. That will be helpful to you. Question in the back. I'll take a couple.
Why don't you make the paper a different size so they don't accidentally stick it in the machine and someone will vote it? Make it impossible for that paper to get into the machine at all.
That's a great
good idea.
That's a great idea.
Size and color.
Size and color. You betcha.
You know, I went to workshops for Ohio Voter Integrity Program.
Yes.
I
Good people.
manned that in this county. And they had Christine Engelbright, who you've seen on Fox this week, who started True the Vote
Yeah.
because of what was going on in Sheila Jackson Lee's district.
Mm-hmm.
And the dirty tricks were unbelievable. Anita Moncrief was in Acorn for over 10 years and turned on it, found the Lord and thought, I can't be party to all this theft and graft. So she spoke and told us, she had like bodyguards down there, police were there, it was unbelievable, sitting in the middle of Columbus. But if our legislature, what it seemed like to me, Chris, and you would know before I do, we had a private donor give money to purge the rolls.
Right.
And USTED stopped that. They don't want citizen input. They tolerate us.
Right.
And
Well,
when Jennifer Bruner was in charge,
Yeah.
she set up all this stuff,
She did.
and we're complying.
Yeah. There was two things that happened that encouraged Secretary Hughes to do the right thing. I would say three. The Secretary, he did execute the oath of his office, okay? And I'd say that to his credit, he's done some of these things. But there was also a lawsuit by Judicial Watch, okay? There was a list of criteria that they were suing the Secretary of State. He did follow those guidelines, and they settled out of court in December. If some of you saw that, of course, you were all doing the holiday. You know, that's how they do these things, you know. They drop the big judgments and cases and policy in the middle of December, so you don't know. You're with your family. That case was settled out of court, but the Secretary has done a lot of the provisions that were in the lawsuit. So there was an agreement between the two parties, the Judicial Watch and the Secretary of State. The Secretary also released a report, I failed to mention, on December 18th, of non-U.S. citizens. They found of 240 that were, get this, we had 240 individuals, not U.S. citizens, registered to vote in the state of Ohio, 17 of which confirmed voted in the 2012 presidential election. The Attorney General is pursuing. Now that's a higher level, so rather than local law enforcement, he is pursuing that for prosecution. So that was in addition to what we've already stated. So now, you know, all of this goes in our argument. So you can take this facts and argue it on the local level as well. I do want to say one thing about the incident reports. If you know of a situation or you witnessed it, fill out Form 450, ask it of the Board of Election, and then you fill it out and submit it to them. Here in Medina County, it was very interesting. Form 450 clearly states that it is to be forwarded on to the Secretary of State. Remember when he said the days following the election, everything went pretty smoothly here? Wow, remember that? Things went pretty smoothly in Ohio. Well, that was before we found all this and presented it to him. Also, you can't blame the Secretary, because if they didn't report to him, they didn't tell the boss they had problems, how does he know there was problems? And here's the case in point. Your own Board of Election had a short stack of incident reports, Form 450, with a cover sheet they submitted to us that said we didn't deem anything in these reports necessary to forward it on to the Secretary of State.
Because we want to look good.
Not only that, it's not their call. The form clearly states, it's a state form. It says this must be forwarded on to the Secretary of State. So your own Board of Election took it upon themselves to make that own judgment call. So in a way, we did kind of rat out and tell on some of these folks around the state, okay? They need to kind of clean up their act a little bit, in other words, and we need to help them. So one of the things we want to do is recruit young people. Young people, yes, hi. We want to recruit you to work with us old folks at the polls, okay? Because we need help, right?
Right.
Because it's easy to throw one fast past grandma. Think about it. I was working the polls in a low turnout this last election. I couldn't imagine what it would be like with an onslaught of presidential and how much can be thrown past people. So we need younger people with quicker, sharper minds to, hey, just a minute here. I think you see, we need you. So you need to do a campaign of recruitment across the state, having young people